and welcome to another exciting episode of Liquid Weekly. As always, I'm your host, Karl Meisterheim, and with me is my co-host, amazing man, specimen of human being, Taylor Page. Taylor, hello.
Hello, hello. I was
And
worried you were going to
this,
say somebody else's name there for a second. That's a nice
well,
intro.
they just left. And and we're so excited today to welcome Marianne, a Shopify designer, developer, and founder of Ultrafine, to the show today to talk some really exciting things about React and some other stuff. So, Marianne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. Um, as always, we'd like to jump in and kind of catch up on what we're doing in life. So, Taylor, what you been doing, work-wise, life-wise? What's been keeping you busy?
Just all of the above, work and life stuff. So my daughter turned 8 years old last week, so I'm
Wow.
officially getting pretty old, nearing the double digits with a kid. And so we took her to an indoor water park. That was what she wanted to do. We did it for my son's fifth birthday, which was last month, and they liked it so much. It's kind of like if you've ever been to a water park. There's a lot of different like heights that you have to be for different rides. And so this one is much more geared towards little kids. So there was a lot of stuff. We didn't run into that whole like they can't ride this ride and this ride and this ride. And the bonus of this one, to put this plug out there, I mean, if they want to like sponsor us, Cedar Point's Castaway Bay, that's great. So no actual sponsorship here, but it was great if you do have small kids because like from these slides, like you can sit in a hot tub and see the slides. So we could just send the kids off and sit in the hot tub while they did that. So that was great. So good for us. Huge win for them. Huge win. Huge fan, at least. So great for the smaller kids. Like I said, probably if your kids are over 10, it'll probably be a little bit dull. You'd want to go to one of the bigger parks or something. I think Kalahari and Big Wolf, I think, are some of the bigger ones here in Ohio, at least anyways, for indoor water parks. And so, between that, you'll be really happy to hear, Karl, I bought some glasses for the Eclipse.
Oh,
So
good. You weren't just going to stare at it?
I got, yeah. Well, I know our last one. So Karl, this episode isn't out yet. It'll be out by the time this episode's out. But I was kind of, I had a lackluster response kind of to Karl's excitement to the Eclipse. And so, because
it
I'm
was
kind of like,
disappointing.
these happen all the time, right? These big solar events or whatever. And Karl was like, no, this is a big deal. And so I did. I got some of the glasses and stuff. I'll have to link that up in the show notes. I found one because there's all these like scammy ones, right? You don't want to cheap out on these.
No,
And
you
so,
don't.
No,
if you're
definitely.
looking at it, the sun, like they can damage your eyes with the rays or whatever. So
So they
there's like
say.
so they say. I mean, have you ever met anybody who was like, I can't see now because I stared at the eclipse? Like it doesn't, I've never met anybody. But so the American Astronomical Society has like an approved list of vendors, and so I mean we could link that up. I guess it'll be past the eclipse probably by the time this one comes out. So personal stuff, got back into triathlon training mode. Going to do an event, 2 sprints this year, so one in June and one in September. So excited for that. And then work wise. Just a couple of client wins where I've got the main folks that I work with, and that's all been going good. And then working on like offloading somebody that kind of like fell off and then kind of popped back on. That I was just really excited to work with, so I'm really happy about that. And then I got another chance to do a bit of pair programming. I've been trying to do more of that lately, Karl, because we did that maybe a month or so ago, and I enjoyed that. I got a lot out of it, so had the opportunity to do it again with checkout extensions with somebody. And so. Yeah, that ended up being a good deal there. So, but yeah, that's kind of what's going on, personal, professional, and everything else in between. It feels like,
Well, thanks, Taylor. Thanks for the update. And I appreciate you considering what we did, pair programming. It was more me trying to get you to solve my problem, but glad it felt edifying to you. And we'll do it again sometime.
there's
So I've
two
got lots of
devs on a
fun.
call sharing a screen, someone's typing code. That's pair programming, right?
Yeah.
That's my definition. There's probably a more professional definition out there, but that's
No.
good enough for
Pair
me.
programming is a great exercise, and I enjoy it.
Yeah.
Marianne, obviously we're going to dig into everything here with you in a minute, but how about yourself? Do you have anything you want to share about your current week or what's happening?
Yeah, so I have done quite a bit of traveling this month. So visiting family. My family's kind of scattered across Europe. So I've spent a few long weekends here and there. So I'm happy to be back now, trying to get back into my routine. And I am basically trying to figure out how to be productive with work while still taking care of myself, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with. So I did yoga a few years back on and off, and I've recently started again, which I'm really happy about. And it's just, it's really good for the body and the mind. And because I've had a few back issues, I spend so much time sat down, as I'm sure everyone here does, and everyone watching. So it's good to do something that's good for the body, and feeling really proud. And I don't know what's happened in the last couple of days, but summer has arrived in Porto. Like, it's really weird. It went from relatively chilly to like, oh, sorry. Yeah, but I mean, it's kind of probably due to climate change, so I'm not exactly like very excited. But yeah, it's like very, very hot all of a sudden. So I am looking forward to potentially going out for my first evening out for dinner, like outside tomorrow night. Ooh. So that's exciting. So that's what's going on the personal level, and work-wise. Well, Karl, I have to thank you again for including my blog post in this week's newsletter. Like, it was amazing seeing the amount of traffic on my website. I was so excited. And also off the back of that, I've actually exchanged a few emails with the co-founder of Maestro, the company behind Prestige. And it's been so much fun, exchanging emails with him. He's given me some insights on their decisions, on how they approach CSS and JavaScript. And it's just been such a nice interaction. And I've learned a lot from that. So yeah, thank you so much again for that. It's opened some nice doors for me. And otherwise, I have just wrapped up 2 React features for a client. So good timing. And then I'll probably be working on another feature for the same client next week. And then after that, I'm potentially going to have a few weeks of kind of more quiet time, and I'm kind of aiming to sit down and think, what do I want to do for the business? Like, I know like a lot of everyone watching, is potentially interested in, and we discuss this a lot, Taylor, having a product. Obviously it's been on my mind for a long time as well. And I'm kind of keen to get started on that. So yeah, potentially some strategy and decision making in the next few weeks, hopefully.
Oh, how exciting. I'm glad to hear that link has worked out for you, because sometimes, it's hard to tell what that translates into for people, but the vision behind Liquid Weekly was to help developers get some exposure and help bring to light what they're doing, so I'm glad it was a win for you.
It's been amazing. Thanks.
And the yoga thing, it's exciting you're doing that. I've tried it on and off several times in my life, but personally, I just find it to be really stretching, so it's a tough thing for me to get into. But anyway, no, I'm pro yoga, actually. It's great.
Nice one.
For me, thank you. I have been working on Shopify functions a lot, and this would be great to be able to talk to you about it, because React is not my jam. And obviously, functions don't have a lot to do with React per se. That's more checkout extensions, but I feel like it all fits together in my headspace. But 2 exciting things I learned about as I was working on functions this week were the buyer journey and the buyer identity, because a lot of folks are looking to do checkout extensions, some kind of checkout validation function. You want to restrict orders to a certain size. You want to make sure certain information is there. And if you look at the tutorials that I have found available, one of the things that you run into real quick is that if you follow those tutorials by default, those validations apply against adding to cart as well as a checkout screen. And it wasn't clear from a lot of things I was finding how to get around that. And so the buyer journey is a way to do that. And so I found that to be very helpful. And then the other one is the buyer identity. These are all GraphQL objects you get back in the function query if you specify them. If you're trying to restrict to, say, B2B customers, in Liquid, you get on the customer object, you get a really easy B2B question mark sort of property you can look at. But in the function itself, you have to go after the buyer identity and then check for if the company is there or not. So a couple GraphQL things that were really helpful to learn in terms of my functions. And I ran into a couple of CLI bugs too. I was having a really hard time getting my function app to install in the store I wanted to install in, and then reaching out on the Slack channel. It looks like there was some kind of bug that was affecting it. I don't know if the fix went out, but by the time you watch this, it probably has. And if Taylor can still see after the eclipse, he'll be able to look at that too if he needs to. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's kind of what I've been focusing on in my life, yeah. And I alluded earlier, it was my wedding anniversary, and I took my wife out for a surprise lunch. I told her we had to go sign tax forms, so I arranged for like a babysitter and everything, and then took her to the accountant's office, but we actually just went to dinner. And then she got me a big ball of cheese balls, so I can't complain. That is
so slick.
Love is in the air here.
Congratulations.
In Ohio.
That's beautiful.
You're such a romantic, Carl.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, so people, if you're still listening to us, thanks for sticking around. Let's get to the meat of the show. Marianne, I think we warned you, but if not, I'm a big proponent of like understanding where people are from contextually. And so to start with, could you give us sort of a 30,000 foot view of like how did you arrive at being a Shopify designer and developer and specializing in like luxury? Like all that stuff is very interesting to me.
Yeah, so I guess we can rewind all the way back to I was born in the UK to
we're going way back.
Irish, way back, to British-Irish parents. But I moved to France when I was like 2.5. So I grew up to be bilingual, English and French. And I think the bilingualism helped with programming now, looking back. I was quite average at school. I potentially had a few attention issues. I didn't really focus, and I much preferred being at home on my computer, either designing, a family newspaper or a magazine or something, nothing too elaborate as you can imagine, or, buying a PC mag and playing the free game that came on a floppy disk like to death over and over. So yeah, that basically summarizes my childhood. And then, so I went to uni, I studied business and languages, obviously, because the languages came easy. I was a little bit kind of directionless at that age. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And immediately after graduating, I landed my first job in Paris, representing Christian Dior as a customer service rep. And so I spent a year doing that, which was amazing, working for such a beautiful brand. Learning all about the luxury space, how to speak to clients, all that fun stuff. And then I was moved by my company, which basically was kind of an outsourcing customer service company that provided customer service for luxury brands. I was moved by them to New York to help set up the Cartier North America customer service team. Oh. So that was really fun. Early 20s, New York, really good time. And after that, I moved back to London to do something similar for Burberry. So this was a much larger team. And I stayed there for about 3.5 years, I think. And so, yeah, I stayed in London for a few years, met my husband, and worked for some kind of fashion startups. And I think after a while, I loved my job, but I felt like there was something else that I wasn't fulfilling. I think it was maybe a creative side. And at the same time, I was actually trying to be an artist, like a musician. So I'm a singer-songwriter and producer, and the dream was to do something, for a living. Like,
Sure.
How naive of me. So basically, there came a time when Tristan, my husband, he was able to take some time off his business, and he said, "Let's go traveling. You can give music a go, and see what happens." So. Obviously nothing happened with music. And after a few months, I was like, okay, now I need to, figure out how to make money. So I came across a forum post where basically, I can't remember what it was now, but this person was saying, look, I need to figure out a way of making money. I've got development skills and a bunch of other things. And the whole thread was people saying, as long as you've got dev skills, you can make money. Like, you can work from anywhere, you can make money. Like, you don't even need to be that good. And I was like, okay, yeah, sold. Let's give it a go. And also there was also the fact that Tristan, my husband, he himself worked as a front-end dev, and he'd constantly told me that there's such a demand for the skill set that, it just opened doors. He ended up working quite quickly for some of the world's most renowned brands. So, I'd kind of been hearing that for a while, that it was something that was so, sought after. And yeah, so I just did a Udemy course back in 2016. I enjoyed it a lot, was a bit scared of the JavaScript side of things. I thought it would be design that I'd enjoy more. And yeah, I started, trying to find some clients to work with, cold emails. I ended up doing quite a few WordPress projects initially. And I also, do you guys remember the 99, or maybe it's still around, the 99 Designs website, where it's competition for. So I won a design competition on there. And I remember it being just the most incredible, it was $1,060 that I won. And it was just the first time that I got paid for my design. And it was a real win for me. And so then I guess after a couple of years maybe of freelancing, trying to find my own clients, like WordPress clients for the most part, I moved to Austin, Texas, and I was fortunate to work for an ad agency there called T3, where I worked on some massive brands, worked with an amazing team there. And then it was then in 2019 when I first really touched Shopify. So I'd obviously heard about it, and I'd had a few people ask me if I wanted to work on a project. I was never available. And I started freelancing for an agency in the States, and then moved back to Europe, continued freelancing for agencies, and then it was about 3 years ago that I thought, okay, I'm ready to go back to working with my own clients. I think I'd mostly been freelancing as a developer and doing also some SEO support for clients as well, like SEO research and stuff like that. And I think the design side of things was a bit unfulfilled. I was looking to, I missed interacting with clients as well. Like I like the feeling of, making a client happy and answering their questions and stuff. So yeah, for the last 3 years, I've been working directly with clients under Ultrafine, and it's mostly me with the support of some lovely freelancers for, occasional support with tasks and other stuff like that. But yeah, that's where we are today.
Wow.
That's
I'm
awesome.
exhausted.
So much experience. Yeah.
Sorry.
I was gonna say. Woo.
No, that's incredible.
awesome.
What you packed into such a short span of time.
Yeah.
In your life, not in the podcast, Marianne. Just to be clear, that was great.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Am I already talking too much?
No.
Right.
I'm just
Because you're not like 58 years old, like with all this experience or whatever. Like you're very
accomplished
young,
so much.
and you have all of this stuff that you've done. That's incredible. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so nice.
I think anytime I meet someone from Europe, especially, I feel so inadequate because, like, oh, they've got so much culture and experience. And they're like all over the world. I'm in Ohio.
Right. And I'm like,
I've been to Michigan too.
Farthest west I've even been is Colorado, and so yeah, I've never left the country. So that's usually how I introduce. I'm just your standard uncultured American. Yeah. That's me.
Oh
so.
no, that's way.
Well, we're super
no.
impressed, Marianne. It's what a journey you've been on.
Oh, thank you so much.
And especially obviously your husband. I hope Tristan. Which, by the way, I love that name because I'm big into George Harriet and the All Creatures Great and Small stuff. But assuming he was a help to you, like. Still, it must have taken a lot of gumption, I guess is the right word, to basically level up, because programming is no easy feat if you haven't had any background in it. Like, it's a lot to wrap your head around.
Yeah,
so kudos.
I think yeah, it's been hard. I think like it's easy to let self-doubt creep in, especially as I wasn't particularly good at school, and I never thought I was very logical, not great at maths, all that stuff. So I would say that Tristan's been instrumental in pushing me at the very critical times where I probably wouldn't have taken something on because I didn't think I could do it. And he'll be the one who pushes me over that last mile of just say yes and, you'll figure it out kind of thing.
I like him already. That's good. Wow. Okay. Well, with that background and amazing context out of the way, so let's talk React. So I don't know how you guys feel. Personally, in my professional life, I have stayed away from JavaScript front-end frameworks because I simply can't keep up with it all, and it drives me a little bit mad sometimes. And as a language, it hasn't always been my favorite. Clearly, JavaScript in 2024 is much different than JavaScript, even 2, 3, 4 years ago. So, tell us a little bit about how you got into React, how you decided that was the place for you. Like, what was it that drew you to that stack? Was it simply that Shopify kind of pushes it as their main driver? Or do you just find an elegance in it that I won't understand?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's kind of a mix of both. Like there's a reason why I've stuck with it. It's because I've ended up enjoying it. But I think initially it was because some of the projects that I worked on either had React already in the code base, was part of their, kind of development stack. And also, I think, obviously everyone's heard how popular it is, and, it was very kind of trendy to know about React. So I'd already kind of tried to, I tried to familiarize myself with it quite early on. And I was kind of looking out for projects that needed it, basically. And then with time, I just found that those kinds of projects were coming to me. And then I dabbled a little bit in Shopify apps as well. I did a recent Shopify app extension with the front end being React as well. So it's just a tool that I've turned to and that I kind of, I'm attracted to in general for various reasons. which I can definitely go into.
Yeah, I think that's good because I know part of that is we wanted to talk a little bit about a little bit of a background on it in general, and then kind of maybe move into like why and when, because I'm interested. I know there's a lot of things that we can get into with that, because early on with that, obviously jQuery was great, but then like kind of the big three showed up or whatever, I would say, like JavaScript libraries or whatever, right? You've got like Angular, Vue, and then you've also got React. And so
Yeah.
I think people kind of fall one way or the other, and I think a lot of people did, just because React just became very popular, want to go that route. So as far as maybe covering a little bit of the background on React, what was your first project like with React? If you want to talk about that kind of as part of the background, where you were like, hey, like this is a good use case for it, you're learning about it, or you're wanting to implement something like that. What was your first project with React like in a Shopify theme?
It was, in a Shopify theme. It was actually the client I'm currently working with still, that they had a custom theme that already used React for a lot of the components. And so, I was building basically this isn't my first React project. It's the first one in Shopify, I would say. And I was building a product customizer for them. So it's a highly customizable product. You need to be able to switch between the different variants, but also line item properties. And so it's like a full page modal, where basically the images change each time you choose an option, the price changes each time you choose a variant, that kind of thing. So it was a relatively complex first Shopify React project. And it gave me confidence to use React elsewhere in themes, basically.
Was it helpful to have like that kind of example already set up for you, that you were just having to extend or tweak or whatever kind of type thing? You kind of got to see how it works to some degree.
Yeah, exactly. It was really helpful. And I've kind of kept a similar kind of, build process as that first project, actually, which I can definitely kind of take you through as well. Like React is really good for like more complex UIs. So where, you need to, in vanilla JavaScript, you'd need to like actually, query elements in the DOM and like change them, hide them, display them, change the styling depending on, what your state or what it is that you're doing. Whereas with React, I love that, it's quite declarative. So basically you describe what you want to happen in the DOM based on the value of a certain state, and React does all the heavy lifting for you. So from the developer perspective, it just makes it so much easier to, kind of bring together an interactive kind of widget or an interactive element on the page. And I have worked with other libraries, like, for example, Vue. I've dabbled a bit in Alpine.js. I've heard great things about Svelte. I think what I like about React and what I've heard other people like is that it's so first of all, it doesn't have two-way binding. It's unidirectional, which means that you have a lot more control over how you update your state. And it feels safer. It feels like it's just more controlled. So it might end up being a little bit more verbose than, say, Vue. But at the end of the day, you just, as long as you accept that, it's gonna be a little bit of a few extra lines to update your state, because, it's immutable. So you have to create a new state object each time. You can't just like modify the existing state. As long as you get past that, then you find that there are no limits. Like if you use JSX to write out your HTML, like it's pure JavaScript and pure HTML. It's just that they've been married together in a really nice way. There's no like V4 attributes or, the attributes that you find in Angular. Like it all feels very familiar, and you just feel quite versatile. You feel quite flexible. There's it feels all very natural, basically, to me at least. But I know it's a matter of preference.
Yeah, right. Karl's like, no, it's all JavaScript, so no, all of it out the window.
You got me, Taylor.
So, as far as that goes, because we probably don't need to go too depth into background around it, like, and we touched on this a little bit, but like, so the why and when behind using it in a Shopify theme. So you're in this instance, when you first started working with it, like they're already using React, and it's in a relatively complex UI. We need some pretty unique features, right, with this very custom builder. And like you mentioned, like doing this with vanilla JavaScript, it's going to be pretty labor intensive. So, there's a whole bunch of ideas behind that, right? Like it's faster build time for the client, so we can make this more affordable too if we're not spending a ton of time on dev, if we can do this quicker, all this other stuff. But so as far as maybe how you approach this when you're coming into a new job, let's say there's no existing React at all, kind of type thing, whatever, we're working with a theme from base, or you're doing a new build. Why or when would you choose to use React or start to fold that in?
Good question. I think it is when you're getting into the kind of more complex UIs. So like I said, the product customizer, also like quizzes, anything where, they're going to be making choices that need to be stored in some kind of state, where it might be multi-page or the views need to change kind of easily. So I would say that I've had this debate in my head for a while, like if a site already has React, and you're brought in to, like, say, make a new PDP or something like that, like, should you use React anywhere you would usually use JavaScript? And honestly, I'm not sold either way. I've had this debate like constantly in my head, and I haven't settled on either side of the fence. But I think it really is about what you feel as a developer helps you, because at the end of the day, it's a developer library. So it's there to make your life easier. At the end of the day, it just delivers a tiny little bundled code. Tiny depending on how you code, but at its basis, it's quite small and performant, and it's there to help you basically. I will say that, because it's rendered in the client instead of server side, it means that there is that brief moment. Basically the HTML loads, and then, the component is rendered like on page load, right? So you are at risk of affecting performance, particularly the cumulative layout shift, I believe, is a metric that seems to suffer quite a bit. So obviously there are solutions to that, like, you can either put a skeleton or some kind of shell where especially if it's on page. So if it's a modal, if it's a button that's loading a modal, then no problem.
Right,
but if it's like actually on the page, like it takes up space on the page and it's going to push down all the content below it. Trying to think about the shell, can you build a skeleton element until that element gets injected? And another solution is potentially, adding a no JavaScript fallback within the actual component. So with React, you're targeting React DOM, you're targeting a component in the DOM, saying, hey, this div with this ID or data attribute, insert it here, render it inside this thing. So something that I've started doing is doing the Node.js fallback inside that, because if there's no JavaScript, it's not going to be replacing the contents of it with the component. And it means that on page load, they've at least got, like some kind of fallback, even if it's not a full experience, even if it's just even saying you need JavaScript to have the full experience. And, here's as much information we can give you just from Shopify, like from Liquid kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's a good idea to have those safeguards. I mean, I don't think that's a common thing, or I don't always think about that either, is making sure that there's a safeguard in place. Karl always remembers this because Karl's a 10x amazing developer. But the rest of us, typically, it's an easy thing to forget because, most of folks are going to experience the web with JavaScript. But yeah, we definitely need to make sure that we're kind of providing some of those use cases. And I really appreciate too that you talked about cumulative layout shift and not just performance from the standpoint of speed. So cumulative layout shift being that whole, that's a core web vital metric that we actually have to care about. And a really good thought as far as strategies on making sure there's a skeleton, which some way of reserving that space, so that way when it does load, it doesn't push content around a lot, which is the thing that really ends up biting folks for that.
I have a question for you.
Oh, yes,
go ahead, Marianne. No, you respond to Taylor.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say on the topic of no JavaScript. So, I told you that I was chatting to Mikael from Maestro this week, and he told me, he drew my attention to a pull request for Dawn that I think was approved in the last week, where basically they removed, obviously, support for IE, but also removed no script support, because actually the checkout extensibility requires JavaScript. So it feels like there's not so much of a need to support Node.js. It sounds like we're moving more towards a Shopify requiring JS. So yeah, I kind of had to update my thoughts lately, just recently on this. But yeah, in terms of the cumulative layout shift, I would still think about that fallback if just to improve performance. Yeah.
Yeah. If you want your designs to be ultra fine, which we do. Because,
Boom.
I had a question. You mentioned a moment ago that sometimes you come into a theme there's already existing React versus maybe there's not, and it's HTML and JS that's already in there, but you might reach for React anyway. So one of the things I have run into in my long and illustrious career is getting into projects where someone did reach for a JavaScript framework, fast forward 5 years, and suddenly that framework is so out of date that it would basically take rewriting it to even make it possible to work with at this point. Have you run into that yet in the work you're doing? Do you foresee a future where that could be a ding for reaching for something like a React? I guess it would apply to most frameworks, not just React, versus sticking with vanilla JS.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about React is that it's moving so slowly, and it tends to be. I think the last update, and don't check me on this, but I think the last update was in 2022. The last update was in 2022, I think, and now we're waiting for version 19, I believe. So it moves slowly, and they do seem to be quite good on with compatibility, and it's quite solid. They don't make massive changes that break everything. Although the new features that they pack into each release are quite massive. So
and that's the benefit probably of. Oh, I'm sorry. I was gonna say that's probably the benefit to some degree of picking a more mature, right, or tested or stable JavaScript library, like Karl mentioned, like trying to keep up with all of these, because that's the joke in JavaScript world, right? There's a new library like every week that comes out, kind of type thing. So you do have to like avoid shiny object syndrome, and if you are going to add something like this, you probably should pick something that is a bit more mature or stable.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, the ecosystem is amazing. So many libraries to support you, and obviously, it's if you come across an issue, then there's lots of Stack Overflow posts that can help you. But the documentation is awesome as well. Like it really, really is very good, the React documentation. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. So there's obviously React in the theme space, but we're seeing more and more React used in checkout extensions and some of the app templates, things like that. Have you delved into that space a lot? What have you found that experience to be like?
Yeah, so I used Remix for a custom Shopify app recently, and that was really fun. It was about 3 months ago, so I have to say my memory's already been overtaken by other stuff.
For those that don't know, possibly Taylor, could be me, could be Taylor. What is Remix? How would you describe it to somebody that's not familiar with it?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so it's a framework. It's not a library. It's quite it's quite opinionated. It's the framework that Shopify has adopted for basically Shopify apps. It's part of the kind of their basic template for spinning up a Shopify app. And basically it does. Let me try and remember, because it has been a few months and my memory has been overtaken by, by other stuff.
Well, and they so I've heard it referred to, like, as far as like the simplest version of it, is like it's kind of like a React wrapper, like to some degree, right? And so the original devs working on it, I believe they worked on React Router initially. I think I could be mixing that up.
So it's like the Snoop Dogg of React.
The Snoop Dogg of React.
You said it was a React wrapper.
I said router.
Oh, router. I think you said wrapper.
Router. Oh, no. Well, yeah. So React wrapper, yes. Like as far as like how it's described, but the original folks working on it being React router, so a wrapper around React. So this is Karl. You slay me. I totally missed that. But yeah. So as far as I'm very unaware or unintelligent when it comes to that. I've tried playing around a little bit with it through their hydrogen and oxygen. So every Shopify store, every Shopify plan from basic plan and up come with, like, you can host your own shop on. It's built with Remix, but they're calling it hydrogen and oxygen. So oxygen's the hosting environment. Hydrogen is the library framework around Remix, I guess. Libraries and frameworks always confuse me as far as like which one's the proper one to use. But that's the idea. Is it's built on Remix, but you can host it that way. So it's their idea for headless, right?
And Remix is what's different about it is that it's tightly coupled with the API endpoint. So in one file, you will have both the kind of server-side logic as an action and then the kind of front end. So you're writing your code further down the page in the loader and it's interacting with the action right above it. So it's all kind of compartmentalized in that way. And I have to say, initially I was a little bit doubtful, but it does make it quite pleasant actually to write.
That's cool.
Nice.
I'll have to look into that some more.
You
again,
will.
partly intellectual laziness, partly cynicism. I tend to stay away from a lot of the specialized stuff and stick with the more trodden paths. But
I was very cynical about Remix. I did not want to like it, but I ended up really liking it, even though I know that I've forgotten a lot of it. But that's if I can index other information.
You could probably pick it up pretty quick. So as far as so Remix being a great option and kind of React based, right, to some degree and whatever. But so how we're talking about React in Shopify themes. So how would you go about adding React to a theme? So if we are talking about that from start, we also had so Liam Griffin, developer advocate over at Shopify and stuff, had also kind of asked a couple of clarifying questions, asking about project directory, how it's structured, what kind of build processes that has to come into play and the initial benefits from that. So maybe you can talk about the different ways probably, and then maybe a preferred way that you implement React in a Shopify theme.
Yeah, so basically if you're using React to build a component, you're using JSX, the kind of JavaScript and HTML syntax, you will need something to kind of compile that down to vanilla JavaScript that then gets served to the browser. So my tool of choice is ESBuild. It's just something that I'm familiar with and really performant. I think you can use Babel as well. I have tried a couple of times to use Vite, but each time I've come across an issue and I think it requires an index in the input directory and then you can use it in library mode instead, but then I kind of gave up and thought, okay, ESBuild works for me, that's fine.
Yeah, both it works.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, maybe one day I'll figure out how to use Vite instead, but ESBuild does the job. It's literally just compiling JSX, so it's not a massive thing. So the way that I structure directories is in the kind of parent directory, there'll be a theme folder where obviously all your theme goes. And then in the kind of parent directory, I'll initialize npm. I'll install, so ESBuild obviously, React DOM, and also a library called Concurrently. And Concurrently allows me to write a script, an npm script, that both obviously compiles my JavaScript using ESBuild and also serve it to Shopify through the Shopify CLI. So write those scripts, and then I add a source folder where I add all my, an index.js and import the components as needed. And then the final thing is open your theme.liquid and actually add the script that you've defined in the npm script. So whatever name it is, like custom.js, whatever it might be, add it there, deferred preferably to optimize for performance. So that's the setup. And then in terms of the actual, what do you do with it? What about the actual script? So as we mentioned earlier with React, you start with a DOM element where you want to render your component. So the first step is figuring out, okay, am I hard coding this div? Am I hard coding it? Is it in the mobile menu, or is it a section or a block? Does it need to be in the customizer? So just basically creating a liquid file where you've got that root element where you're going to be rendering your component. And then in the script, what you're doing is you're searching for that. You're doing a query on the DOM, looking for it, and you then say, okay, React render, or React DOM rather, render this component here that I've created inside that thing. So the thing to bear in mind with this is that, basically you so say if you've got a block, say you're building accordions with React, which I don't know why you would, but say you've got multiple accordions.
Sure.
Basically you need to make sure that you're targeting all the instances of this. Well, it won't be an ID because you can't have multiple IDs, but you need to target all instances of elements with this data attribute, for example. So that's the first thing. If you think there might be multiple instances of this, then make sure you're querying multiples, query select all, and initiating the render on all those nodes, basically. And then the other thing to bear in mind, and I've had to think about all the pitfalls of React, and I think this is using React with Shopify, and this is my kind of biggest pitfall, is that if you've got in the customizer a section with lots of settings, how do you get those settings in React? And basically you kind of just have to output them in JSON format in your Liquid template, and then fetch them in React, which feels very un-React-like. So it doesn't feel great, but you got to do it. And then you have your JSON, you pass it, and then you can just use it as a regular object in your React component, basically.
Just 50 easy steps.
Yeah, so that's part of it, right? Like it's a bit of setup, but like when you're comfortable with React, then you can move pretty quickly. You're cooking with gas after that initial uphill battle. So do you have kind of like, so for when I'm starting a shop or whatever, I've got a real basic like template that I start off with or whatever kind of type thing. So do you have kind of something like that already set up so that way you can just drop into a shop, run a git pull to get your theme files and then start a new repo with all your build steps kind of concluded kind of type thing?
I probably should have that, but I have a Dawn with React base repo that I just refer to, and nice. I can just copy over. I've got the steps written somewhere as well, and I just copy over whatever I need to, basically. So I probably need to systemize it a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I did mine the manual way or whatever for a period of time, and then just tested out doing it that way. So I was curious if you can get those steps down to where it's an easy template that you can replicate really simply. So so that's the main way. Are there like we said, like there's different ways that we can include React, right? Anytime if you're wanting to write JSX, so are there additional options? Like obviously with some libraries we can use like a CDN. That's always a terrible idea, right? Kind of type thing, but you could, right, to some degree if you need to in some of these instances. But maybe what are some of those drawbacks or caveats to adding React? I know we talked a little bit about concerns performance. So like maybe what other things you're going to run into. You mentioned settings too, like that's a thing that you have to take into consideration.
Besides self-loading.
Besides what? I'm sorry.
Some things to consider besides the self-loading that will come with it.
The self-loading, yeah. Drawbacks or caveats, and what are some good solves that you have for those when you're doing that?
Yeah. So we've talked about performance already. I don't need to, talk about that any longer. But so one of the things that's annoying is, so on Shopify, if you're building a component where the state or something needs to be shared elsewhere, it feels a bit hacky and un-React-like. Like, for example, if you need the add to cart button to trigger a custom event so that the mini cart opens or something, the clean way is to have a parent element and, have that state up there and then, shared between the children components. I'm not going to wrap my entire, theme in a parent component. So it means that you kind of need to send custom events and on the document or on the window, the usual thing, and then consume that elsewhere. So that feels a little bit hacky. And then, like I said, like having to build out your kind of JSON objects of the data that you need, that feels a little bit hacky. There's also, like, for example, in Liquid, you have access to like certain filters, like money filters or image tag. So, if you want your product data or, you might find that some of the nested elements, some of the nested objects or related objects aren't output or can't be rendered in JSON. So, for example, I came across one with like line item the other day, and line item dot fulfillment. Obviously in Liquid, you can use it. but you can't output it as JSON. So you have to kind of just go, okay, well, let me manually add those properties to my JSON object. And, it's a bit annoying. But I did find a hack where for the image tag, so obviously we love image tag filter because it means that it outputs the, image with all the attributes that you need. And you can actually just add that as a JSON property, like add the string of the image and then hackily insert it dangerously. It's called insert dangerously HTML or something. Like insert it into your HTML so that at least you're kind of replicating the Shopify, you've got the image tag there. It's just so you kind of have to inject it into your HTML, into your React element, which it feels a bit hacky, but at least you can, there are workarounds to getting access to all your favorite things in Shopify.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, anytime you're doing something, right, with just JavaScript in general, with the way that things work, I've done some hacky things with, passing stuff through just like, data attributes or whatever that I have to snag or, whatever, something that gets updated and, oh shoot, I forgot the session storage or something like that, or local storage, So I mean, any kind of bit of JavaScript, like you're gonna get a little bit hacky somewhere. So that's if that's
you
just
said
something
it,
with React,
not me.
to it.
You said it.
You don't get hacky, Karl?
No, I do. I do. It's this thing. I do have a question for you, Marianne. Obviously, you're very smart and know a lot about this stuff, but I'm assuming there are times you have to reach for information. What are some of the best places you have found for yourself and that others might want to know about when you get stuck on a problem or have questions about how to proceed in terms of React and Shopify specifically? What would you suggest people do?
I think the community is a great resource. I am often in the partner Slack. The wonderful mastermind group that we have with Taylor is very helpful. So finding your kind of small community where you know that someone's going to listen to you and someone's going to answer, because I guess sometimes that's a concern that you put a question out there and everyone's so busy, they don't know you. So, finding a little community I think is important. I think I've got more confident with reading documentation in the last few years. It used to be I'd go on Stack Overflow and be like, yep, that one worked. Okay. But now it's like, no, okay, I'm going to take some time and actually understand how this thing works, because it might feel like a lot of effort up front, but actually not only will it fix this problem, but it'll probably mean that I understand why it's a problem and I can make sure that, other problems are solved as well.
It's curious to hear if you'd say it, but you didn't mention AI at all. So do you incorporate any kind of AI coding help in your workflow currently?
I do not. I have asked ChatGPT a few times for help, and each time I knew that it wasn't the right answer.
It was like, no.
It was like,
I don't want to work in React either.
It was really passive aggressive. I screenshotted it because it was so passive aggressive, and I thought, what have I done? Have I not been nice to you? I'm so sorry. But I know that there's going to come a day when it will absolutely provide really great answers. That will be a scary day, but it's also a promising day for
have y'all seen Devin that came out or whatever? There's a wait list for your first AI like full-time programmer or whatever type thing.
That's the extent of it.
Oh wow, I haven't seen that. No.
Yeah, I just thought it was funny because the sign up. I thought it was silly, but I mean, obviously, big companies like Shopify use Google Forms for stuff like this, even or whatever. But I thought it was kind of funny that it's like, oh yeah, it's gonna replace your programmer, and then like the sign up form for it was a Google Doc, and I was like, so Devin can't even write like a sign up form, which is fair. Forms are hard to work with a lot of times, but still.
Hey Devin, if you're listening. Taylor's the one that hates you, not me.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Devin. I'm the guy that like I know it's silly or whatever, but when I'm asking ChatGPT stuff, I'll still say please and thank you and stuff or whatever, just because I'm, you never know when the thing's going to figure out how to turn my power off and on or something.
Yeah, it can happen quickly.
This went down rabbit hole quick.
I'm
sorry to bring up AI. I shouldn't have done it. That's helpful. And Taylor, I'm still waiting for my invite to your awesome Slack community that you guys are all part of. So
it's very exclusive, Karl.
Yeah, apparently. I would just derail the conversation. It's fine. So Marianne, I'm just curious too. Like a lot of your experience has been in the theme space. Have you done a lot yet with checkout extensions and other uses of React outside of just straight up theme stuff?
Yeah, so I developed that custom app just recently, which I seem to have forgotten every detail about. But basically, it was a remix app, and I converted it to work with multiple stores because, as we know, custom apps can't be distributed unless it's a Shopify Plus store. So I hacked it to work for my clients' needs. So that was fun. I have dabbled a little bit in extensions. I have to say it's an area that I'm very excited about. I have a few app ideas about, but I haven't had the chance to properly dive in. I've got a few prototypes that I worked with, but every time I go back to it, things have changed so much that I have to start a brand new template.
See?
So you basically need to do sprints. You need to do like, okay, I've got 1 week to deliver this because otherwise I'm never going to be able to come back to what I've just done and I'm going to forget everything.
Yep. Yeah, the context switch is hard when you're working in and out of those sorts of things. And as a theme dev trying to get into some of this app dev space, because we're losing ground on, what we could do before with checkout.liquid and stuff like that. Now I have to figure out like this app stuff. And so I do have to brush up on React and GraphQL, and those sorts of things. So I do get it. It's hard to like have to jump back into those as well. So it's tough.
Yep.
Sorry, there's like a really loud robin right outside my window. I'm like, can you guys
I could
hear
hear
that
some
bird?
birds.
Can you hear it?
It's really peaceful.
Every now and again, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, it's not a soundscape.
It's nice.
It's a real robin.
It doesn't sound loud to us, though. It's actually kind of nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, those were the big part. I think because we talked about all the main topics that we wanted to hit as far as like adding React into a theme, the when, the why, the how, the drawbacks, project directory structures, build processes, and those sorts of things. So, as far as maybe like main takeaways, it seems like React is really your preference, and we touched a little bit on a couple of other options like Alpine.js and those sorts of things. But for the most part, it sounds like, really, that's the way that you're going to lean. You're not really considering, other options just because, again, it is like pretty well supported. It's pretty mature. And it does have, a performance mindset in place when you have to do something that's going to be pretty customizable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think again, it really is personal preference. Like it's because I have so much experience now with it, and for me it works. But I think it's again about the developer experience. So it improves my experience. It might not improve someone else's experience. And I would just bear in mind those caveats, like, trying to account for CLS, cumulative layout shift. There's also a few other extra bits and pieces that I haven't necessarily mentioned that perhaps, in terms of accessibility, there's a lot of debate around, accessibility on React, etc. The thing is, you're writing your own markup. So as long as you use, semantic markup and native features where possible, you can't go wrong. So from my perspective, it's not an issue doing it. You just do all the stuff that you're usually doing anyway. And
Oh yes, I didn't want to interrupt it. No, and to your point there, like accessibility, definitely we should always be talking about that 100%. But the same drawbacks that you get, accessibility concerns around something like React, it's the same thing when I'm getting real hacky with vanilla JavaScript or you're, you still have to make sure that you're doing all of those other pieces. So, it's not a React only problem. It's not a Vue.js or an Angular only problem. Like
exactly
all devs and every steps of anything that we're doing, we have to worry about accessibility, and that's just what it is.
Exactly. And you might go around about things like instead of targeting something with query selector, you would create a ref for the thing that you're trying to put focus on instead of targeting it. One thing that I have come across is that, with ARIA live regions, regions in the DOM where you basically kind of make messages play out to screen readers, like if product's been added to cart or if search results have come up, that kind of thing. So that area, that ARIA live, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, that region needs to exist on page load. So it basically needs to be as high up in the kind of component tree as possible for it to still stay there and not re-render each time there's a state change. So, it's just remembering these tiny little caveats and bearing that in mind. And then on the topic of SEO, there's some debate about this as well. Like, Google's own kind of, not documentation, but article on this topic basically says, keep in mind that server-side or pre-rendering is still a great idea because it makes your website faster for users and crawlers, and not all bots can run JavaScript. So it doesn't say how that impacts it, but it is a thing. So that's why I try to keep away from like loading any kind of rich content like images and text where you probably don't need React anyway, making sure that's, you know, rendered on the server, and trying to keep it to the, you know, the interactive experiences and widgets. Yeah.
Right tool for the job. Yeah. Don't use it for everything, right? Like still rely on, you know, best practices whenever you can. That's a really good call out.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's so much helpful information, and I would love to keep talking about it forever, but we got kids and things. Got to do stuff. Taylor,
We got kids.
I feel a wind of change blowing as we shift into the change log segment of our portion here.
I really appreciate your transitions. You just
I try. I spent like an hour working on that one just now.
It shows. It's
Thinking
great.
Europe, the Scorpions, winds of change, the fall of communism. It's good. So. No? Okay. Too deep. I'll pull it back.
That's too deep. Too much. So the changelog. So some of these, they're going to come out a little bit. So just touching on a couple of things really quick. There was an update in the changelog on the deprecation of unpublished apps. So I saw actually a couple of folks that kind of ran into this issue in the Shopify community space kind of type thing, where they had these unpublished apps. But the whole idea is that these are like no longer supported. Kind of type thing or whatever. And so they were having to like go back and basically resubmit them or sunset them, right? And so this idea of making sure you don't have some of those hanging out there, because that can impact some of your other apps as well. So that's just a consideration. Make sure you check that out. We'll obviously link everything up in the show notes, but it's in the changelog, and just be aware of how, unpublished apps work and might affect your partner account and those sorts of things for live apps. So I ran into this other issue the other day too with trying to query customer subscription contracts. So pretty limited as far as what you can and can't do. I was trying to use the GraphQL. I'm not sure how you say it. The Shopify GraphQL. Graphical. Okay, that's better. Graphical app. And found out that I couldn't actually access like customer subscriptions like I was needing to. We're trying to work on this project where we're migrating from a subscription app to Shopify native subscriptions. And like, oh man, the export process and the whole thing took so long. We had more subscriptions come in, all this other stuff or whatever. So I was trying to be like, okay, I'm just going to get one information that I can myself instead of asking them for this. But it was pretty limited on what I could get access to. And so there are some API updates to the customer APIs here that allow querying of all customer subscription contracts, which I thought was pretty nice to see. So that'll be effective April 1st, which this should be out by then. So that was cool. And then, Karl, I don't know if you've been playing around with functions, if you've checked out cart and checkout validations.
You not listen to anything I said at the beginning? Of course I'm playing with functions. I don't care.
So, well, I mean, I know you've been playing with functions. I don't know if you've been playing with cart and checkout validations. Yes, so, and this is, great too. Use case, I've been playing around a little bit with this, Marianne, when you're working in themes as well. So, for instance, I was looking at this in a couple of instances where we've got limitations on how many items we want folks to check out with. And so it'll give feedback back and forth with the cart. So if you don't want people to be able to purchase so many items if they've never purchased before or whatever kind of type thing, you can actually do that through cart and checkout validations API. So it's really nice in the sense that like you get that feedback at the cart, which is ideal, instead of waiting until they get all the way to checkout, which is really nice. So I did clarify too, because we've got some folks still in vintage themes. As long as they're using the cart API, they will still get that feedback in cart and checkout validations. So food for thought there. And I'm getting a little long-winded here, but a couple of quick notes that we'll just drop in. Unification of count fields. I thought that was interesting. So they're changing some API design and naming for a handful of items here instead of total count, just moving to just count. I just thought that was interesting because that's a simplification, but it's going to impact and require migration for a lot of items there. So heads up on that. And then we'll drop some other items in there, as always. Be checking the scheduled tab in the changelog as well, because that gives you an idea on some stuff that's coming down the pipe.
Thanks, Taylor. Your commitment to detail in this is always applaudable. So
I try to
helpful
keep
to have someone
as short as possible. There's always so much stuff that's like...
It's hard.
There's so much stuff in here.
Well, don't worry, steady listeners. I am reining it in now. We are going to transition to the final segment, the third half of the show, as we like to call it, and that is going to be our pick of the week. And so, since we just heard from Taylor, Marianne, would you like to go first? What is your pick of the week?
So my pick of the week is a native macOS app called Lookaway. I discovered it on Product Hunt. And basically, it blurs your screen every 20 minutes or like however long you configure it for. And it encourages you to look at a distant point for 30 seconds or however long you ask it to. And basically, it's something that my optician has got frustrated with me when she asks me how long I spend at my desk, and I say, 12 hours? I don't know. And I get told off all the time, basically. And she says, look, just find somewhere in the distance and focus on that for a few minutes as often as possible. And it'll kind of, I guess, exercise your eye muscles and, it's better for your health. So, yeah, it's a really cool macOS app. I think it's
really clever.
7-day free trial, like $7 lifetime payment. It looks like I'm going to be converting on that one.
Very cool. It's a good reminder, too. I'll go next. I've had like 3 of them come to mind during this whole talk, and I was going to do this Eclipse map thing, but I realized it's going to be too late for most people. And then you were talking, Marianne, just about like self-doubt and imposter syndrome a little bit earlier, kind of in your transition into. So I've actually been reading, I don't know if you can see it, this very interesting book called Psycho-Cybernetics, which the title is like, what Fancy. In the world? But this was written in the 1960s. It's been revised a little bit since then by a plastic surgeon of all people. And what he was discovering was that he noticed a profound change in his clients after facial reconstruction, where simply looking more normal or more appealing changed their entire outlook and their attitude and everything. And so his hypothesis was there must be something going on with the way people perceive themselves, but he also noticed that not everybody felt that way. So it wasn't just the physical change, but something else. And so this dives into it, and I'm not all the way through it yet, but essentially it's about the power of your self-image and how that impacts so much of how you project yourself and move through life and things like that. So that was interesting to look into that. Yeah, Psycho-Cybernetics.
Psycho-Cybernetics.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Taylor, bring it home.
My pick of the week is going to be Basecamp. So Karl will love and appreciate that it's a Rails app, but I need lots of help with project management and staying top of everything. And I recently converted to Basecamp, I think last year. I've tried Trello. I like Trello, but I kind of outgrew what I thought I needed in it. And then Asana. I've tried Notion. I've tried all these different like project management kind of type tools. Basecamp has just been the one that's worked out really well for me. I like a lot of the things that it does. It's really handy and slick. And so it is paid, so that's kind of not great, but also like it does so much. I'm at the point now where I use it for personal stuff too. So like my wife's in the Basecamp as well, and so like if we have the honeydews or whatever, that list of stuff that I'm supposed to be working on is all in there. We've started planning on like our anniversary this year and stuff like that. Everything goes into a Basecamp project, so it's very handy as far as just how it's set up. It just makes sense for my brain. So big fan of Basecamp.
Sorry, I was stickering there because I feel like this is the mentality we always fight, right, around software. It's like, well, I'd use it, and it's the most powerful tool in my life, but it costs money, so there's that.
Right. Right, like it's super helpful. Yeah, there's just some things that are worth paying for. So it's the easiest, some of the easiest money I spend every month because it makes my life that much more manageable. So don't even think about it anymore.
Don't even think about it. Anyway. Well, this has been a scintillating conversation. Thank you, Marianne, for spending time with us today. Taylor, thanks for being here. And Mr. Robin, thank you for your beautiful song. And I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks, everyone, for joining us and listening. Hope you got something out of it, and we'll see you on the next one.